Welcome back to FinWeek Money Matters. The new draft control of marketing of alcohol beverages bill will go before cabinet shortly and could have a material impact not only on the advertising industry but also on sponsorship of sports events. This could negatively impact the country's economy and job creation. As we take a deeper look at what is brewing below, Joe Heshu, spokesperson for the Association of Responsible Alcohol Use, is in studio today. Joe, thank you so much for making the time to join us. Now, of course, the biggest question is the number of jobs that are likely to be lost indirectly or directly should and if this bill is passed. How are you tackling that question?
Just to illustrate the facts, in alcohol industry supports about 548,000 jobs. Through the control of marketing bill, about 12,000 of those jobs would directly be at risk. About 4.3 billion in direct expenditure will be at risk. But I think our approach to it is to seek collaborative solutions with the government, is to seek for more consultation. And under any normal policy making process, there would be consultation. You'd find that government would be calling industry, would workshop some of the policy options, but that's the difficulty we have here. Whilst we are sort of ready to look at the policy options, we have no one to negotiate with.
But that's my issue, is there actually somebody that's spearheading this, and are they prepared to discuss it? Because we seem to have a lot of issues around economic policy at the moment, which seems to blanket decisions get made, and it doesn't seem to think about who gets impacted by it. Is there somebody you can talk to?
Well, the alcohol industry is regulated under the National Liquor Act of 2003, Act 59, which sits with the DTI. However, the bill is coming through the Department of Health because it's being treated as a public health issue. Now, we acknowledge that there's a lot of public health issues around alcohol misuse. However, it is at the end of the day an economic and trade enterprise. So surely the DTI would have a role to play, the Department of Economic Development, even Treasury. I mean, out of total tax revenue, I think we form about 6.7%. So you'd think there'd be a whole multiplicity of players being consulted, and I don't think we've got good with that yet.
Do you think that there's, sorry, I just want to jump in here, but do you get the sense, will it change things if there's will it change the social impact if we spend the marketing of alcohol?
In other words, will we all, us three, drink less? If,
I'm journalists, let's be honest.
Will we be drinking less if there are taxes and levies put on these items?
You know, it's a contentious issue. And depending who you ask, you'll get a different answer. We see no direct link between consumption and advertising spend. And what we are trying to do when we spend money, because that's the question naturally one is going to ask, so if it doesn't affect consumption, why are you spending money? I want to know if the three of you are buying drinks, I want you to buy my drinks. And that's why alcohol companies spend money in advertising. And keep in mind, majority of South Africans do not drink, and no amount of advertising is going to make them drink. It's a predetermined choice. Now, I understand that there is an issue around young people, specifically the youth, underage persons. Does the way in which alcohol advertising is done entice them to drink? And that's why the industry has got codes that are directly meant to prevent exposure of underage persons. If the call is for us to improve that, then we stand ready to do that. But let's have the right discussion.
I want to go back a little bit, and I want to look at maybe a historical comparison. If you look at the tobacco industry, and I remember growing up and there used to be the Rothmans Cup, and I knew that was tobacco because my dad used to smoke Rothmans at the time, right? And I don't see that anymore. But would taking away alcohol advertising open up sponsorship for other advertisers to come forward? Because irrespective of whether Rothmans is there or not, you have the Castle Lager Cup or Colin Black Label Champion Cup instead. So is there a strong case for saying that, well, advertising isn't necessarily going to be impacted because it opens space for other players?
Around the time the tobacco bill that was happening, a number of changes were happening in advertising. One, you had telecommunications companies entering the space in a very aggressive manner. You had also a change with the banks also amping up their activity in the advertising space. So they sort of filled the vacuum that was left by tobacco. In this particular instance, I don't know who will fill that vacuum. If somebody else does, maybe we should have a discussion. But I'm keen to know what's on the horizon for that.
Sure. I think that's an interesting thing, and I just want to go back to what Mark was saying in terms of the collaboration between all the players and who's spearheading this whole thing. Currently, it's led by the Interministerial Committee of the Department of Health. And the interesting thing is, with all this debate and discussion going on, the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Fikile Mbalula, has actually been, looking eye to eye with the Minister of Social Services, because Mr. Mbalula himself has actually said that this is not a good bill because, one, it's going to make sure it's going to, result in losses in terms of sponsorship, and therefore it will impact on his work as the Minister of Sports. So there are disagreements within the government sphere as well, which just goes to show that, this thing needed to have to be given the time, for all the relevant players to sit down and actually try and find the right solution.
It's not just the Minister of Sport who's facing a problem. The Minister of Communications would have a similar problem, in that the SAB would lose about 500 million in revenue that they get. There's also, for other broadcasters, significant losses there. And you'll remember that the Minister of Health at some point did suggest that he would fund the Department of Communications and give the SAB the budget shortfall, which I don't think is the direction we ought to be going. But that being said, they've also made a proposal to say that an additional levy must be introduced to raise funds for the vacuum that will be created in sports. And I think they propose a 2% levy, which would raise about 1.5 billion rands to replace 4.3 billion. Again, it's not enough. And secondly, Treasury would never support a ring fencing policy, because once you've set the precedent, then you're going to start to look at the fuel levy and plastic levy and everything else. And I don't think we are in a space where we want to ring fence budgets.
Joe, let's look at the regulatory framework just for a second. I mean, I understand with regards to advertising, we probably can regulate that, but we've proven over time and time again that we don't necessarily have the muscle to enforce the legal drinking age and whether people should be drinking and not driving, and that's something we seem to have been losing over time. Should the bill be passed, do we have the muscle to actually enforce all that comes under it?
From an industry perspective, and this is one of the criticisms that have been leveled against industry, that we are not implementing the self-regulatory codes that we have. Fine, let's go into a co-regulatory model. So now, in that space, there's a lot of modalities and a lot of modeling that needs to be done to ensure, one, you can enforce. Secondly, it doesn't become cumbersome that you can't do business. And I think that's exactly the conversation that we want to get into government and say, okay, fine, we're moving into a co-regulatory environment. What does it look like and how do we make it work? Because right now, you're quite correct. There is a legal purchasing age that's not being correctly enforced. There is a blood alcohol content level that is not being enforced adequately. So let's start having that discussion.
In looking at that self-regulation, regime, if you will, so the World Health Organization released a circular, I think about 2011, obviously recognizing the ills that are brought about by huge alcohol use and huge alcohol consumption. And countries like France have actually sort of excelled in terms of self-regulation. So you'd have things like, they won't advertise alcohol in places like cinemas because there are children around, and they won't, they will only advertise alcohol beverages that have higher volumes of alcohol, and said at certain times when on TV there is an older age group sort of watching. What in your case, in the case of South Africa, would we be looking? What would we be looking in terms of self-regulation? What are some of the things that we would sort of look at?
The WHO voluntary targets around reducing alcohol misuse are to reduce alcohol misuse in all member states by 10%. Now, if 20% of all alcohol consumed in South Africa is illicit and unrecorded, if we're able to make a dent in that, we're reducing that. We go a long way to reducing that figure. If we start seriously implementing and enforcing the legal purchasing age and ensuring that people below the age of 18 are not allowed access to alcohol, then we start making inroads into that. And we can, I think the target of 10% is definitely achievable of reducing misuse, and you can even achieve more than that. The challenge though is, what can industry and government do together to start enforcing better and to start and to do new things and innovate around compliance and regulation. We have agreed to, as industry, a independent third-party verification of all our marketing content. We are looking to have review, are the schedules correct, are the current audience rating correct, and any other space that will preserve our marketing freedom but enhance compliance.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things that I find interesting. So we only look at tobacco now, and I use BAT because it tends to be British American Tobacco is a publicly listed company. They don't sell any less cigarettes than they did 10 years ago when the marketing got pulled up. And the thing is, their profits go up. So we can argue, so the conspiracy theory argues that in fact this is actually good for big business because obviously it squeezes out little business. If you've got a brand, nothing else can get into it. So now we've touched on craft beer and we've touched on wine as South African produced product. If you're an entrepreneur and you start a wine business or you start a craft beer business and you want to go into Greenside where craft beer is really taken off there now, these guys can't, they can't market themselves. So what, we're just going to go and buy SAB products? I mean, SAB owns about 80% of the South African market.
Yeah, that's the criticism right there, Mike. You know, people are actually saying, some people are actually saying that this will create monopolies in the case of bigger companies like
that's what it's designed for.
SAB.
Competitiveness is a tough issue in the industry. I don't think that the dominant player in the industry would want to see that situation either, because this is their home market. Sure. And if they want to be competitive in the rest of the region, they've got to be strong in their home market. So I don't think that it would in the long term benefit anyone. And it's definitely a barrier to entry. It's definitely a barrier to some success stories in the industries that we see when you see a new player come in 2004 and grab 20% of the market share within about 10 years of existence. So you've got those positive stories, but if you can't be strong in your home market and you can't export wine, the wine industry is heavily reliant on being able to exhibit and for the export business. And if they can't do that in their local market, it's going to be very difficult going forward.
Quickly, Joe, before we let you go, it seems as if there's strong arguments on both sides. Where do you see this bill going? Is it likely to be passed?
As industry, we're very hopeful that we will be afforded a genuine and fair consultation process, and that we will be able to make input in the policy process that will have an equitable arrangement for everyone.